Right. Yeah, we may as well begin. According to my watch, it's 7 o'clock. So, welcome everyone to this study group. This group was requested by Serkan Rinpoche, who had, when he was here last, he agreed to provide a commentary to the Insight chapter of the Lamrim Chenmo. And I was very surprised that he did that because I know that the previous Serkan Rinpoche had made comments about being requested to give commentaries to great texts that would require at least a year to be able to do it, and he was only invited to different places for a week, right? So it's very difficult to for somebody who knows the ins and outs of those great texts to imagine giving a commentary on it for a week. So he requested us to do have a study group where we would come up with questions that we couldn't find satisfactory answers to, and so we could save for his next visit and ask him to provide answers to. So that's the intention of this group. And we're using this text, The Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, published by Snow Lion, Volume 3. And the section dealing with the insight is begins on chapter 7. It has 20 chapters to it, from 7 to 27. So what the plan is that everybody gets a copy somehow, and you study it in between sessions, and identify your questions, and then we'll try to discuss what and come up with satisfactory answers, and those ones that we can't, we'll write down somehow, and keep those for when we meet with Serkan Rinpoche next. Also, if you have questions, then let me know ahead of time by sending me an email. So my email address is Pende. I spell Tubten, Tubten, no H. Pende, Pende, all one word, lowercase, at yahoo.com. So send me an email with your questions ahead of time so that we can, maybe I could do some research ahead of time to see if I can find some answers in my library. Unfortunately, my library is in a condition that it's hard for me to get to a lot of the texts that I have. So one text that was recommended by the editor, who the chief editor provided helped the translation team of this, was that there is a text called Dependent Arising in Emptiness by Elizabeth Napier, published by Wisdom Publications. And that translates the chapters 7 through 12 of this insight section of the Great Exposition of the Stages of the Path, Lamrim Chenmo in Tibetan and for short. So if anybody has that text, that would be very useful, because her footnotes could be very helpful in answering some of the questions that we have. So if you have a copy of that text, you can email me, and then we can maybe discuss some of the information that you find there that is relevant to some of the questions that we have. Also, just a general point regarding this kind of study. I have done a lot of studies of great texts like Lamrim Chenmo and other great treatises by Indian and Tibetan masters. And it's not easy. So Lama Tsongkhapa was a great scholar, like the scholar's scholar. And his comments, his presentation of the insight, the subject of insight into reality, is was made to communicate his understanding of what emptiness is, and the presentation of the two truths, ultimate truth, conventional truth, and other subtle distinctions between different great exponents of the middle way. And and his audience was also great scholars. So inevitably, that we're going to find points that are going to be difficult to understand because we don't have the background that he had, as well as those other great scholars who were his main audience. We don't have the background, so it's going to be difficult to understand. And that's going to cause frustration. So when frustration arises, we need to remember the Bodhisattva's practice of the perfection of patience. In particular, the practice of patience regarding the study and practice of Dharma. So that's one of the three practices of patience that's identified even in the Lamrim Chenmo. Because we're going to be dealing with it. It's going to arise. And so rather than respond to frustration with anger, which will cause a person to want to put down the text and not look at it again, and maybe even justify that by criticizing Lama Tsongkhapa as being too scholarly, or criticizing the text as being that's of no use to me, things like that, those kind of thoughts. Rather than going that direction, then just practice patience. That not to get angry at it. Yes, it's going to be frustrating. Remember my abbot at Nalanda Monastery, we were studying what was considered Lama Tsongkhapa's iron bow. If you remember from Ulysses, he had an iron bow, that he was the only one who could string. So Lama Tsongkhapa wrote this one text that was considered the iron bow because it was so difficult to understand. And Geshe Tengpa, he who had taught here, he kind of warned us and says, sometimes I'm going to get angry, you're going to get angry, because it's frustrating. It's not easy. So I remembered that that's going to happen. I warned you, and just let it go. Don't follow those thoughts. Just let it go. And if it's too difficult, then just say, okay, it's too difficult for me now, but someday when I've got a sufficient background, I'll tackle it again, like that. So our purpose here of studying this is trying to increase our understanding of reality according to the Buddha and his main interpreters, understanding reality, developing the correct view, which is indispensable for gaining liberation from uncontrolled death and rebirth. So it's the antidote to the obstacles to liberation, and also it's the antidote to the obstacles to knowledge. And it's the only antidote, this correct understanding of emptiness. So it's something that if you're on the Buddhist path, you have to cultivate. And it's one of the great ways of doing it is by studying what the great masters have had to say about it. Okay. And if you know the Manjushri's mantra, Omarapatsanadi, recite that a lot before attending these sessions. Okay. So because this is the first session, nobody has, I don't expect people to have, read the chapter ahead of time. So I'm going to read it and stop places where it's of interest, that points could be elaborated more clearly. What has preceded the insight section of the Lamrim Chenmo was the presentation on calm abiding. That's one translation of Sanskrit shamatha, Tibetan shine. Calm abiding is a special level of concentration that is necessary for moving one's intellectual understanding of emptiness into a direct experience. Okay, so that was presented in the first 6 chapters of volume 3. And so the first chapter of the insight sections, chapter 7, titled Why Insight is Needed, is a bridge moving from the presentation on calm abiding to the presentation of insight. So, and in the outlines of the Lamrim Chenmo, this is the outline of how to train in insight. So I'm going to be reading. This is Lama Tsongkhapa speaking. As I have explained, meditative serenity, that's this a meditation group's translation of shamatha, shine. Meditative serenity has the features of non-discursiveness, that is, when your attention is intentionally set on a single object of meditation, it stays there. 2, clarity, that is, it is free from laxity. And 3, benefit, that is, delight and bliss. However, you should not be satisfied with just this. Rather, developing the wisdom that properly determines the meaning of reality, you must cultivate insight. And the word determine is translated in the Tibetan ngepa, which is often translated as certainty. So gaining certainty in the meaning of reality, you must cultivate insight. And this advice about not staying merely with developing calm abiding or meditative serenity and moving quickly to using that ability, that concentration ability, to study and develop and further your understanding of emptiness is something that's commonly presented. And I think one of the reasons is because it's easy to become attached to the experience of bliss in samadhi or deep concentration. So otherwise, since mere concentration is something Buddhists have in common with even the non-Buddhists, its cultivation, as with non-Buddhist paths, will not get rid of the seeds of the afflictions. Hence, it will not free you from cyclic existence. I remember Geshe-no and Darge making the point that if you were to meet somebody who had meditative serenity, who had actually cultivated that concentration, you would think they were a saint. So, but it's not the actual path to achieving liberation. As Kamalashila, so Kamalashila, who was the disciple of Shantirakshita, who was the Indian master who was invited to Tibet in order to establish Buddhist monasticism there. During that time, it was in the early, like the 8th century, he, during that time, there was a big debate that took place between a kind of a meditation tradition of Chinese Buddhism and the form of Buddhism that had been brought to Tibet by Shantirakshita, which was the Buddhism that was presented in the great monasteries of India, such as Nalanda. And so a debate was organized by the king of Tibet in order to determine which form of Buddhism the Tibetans should be following. And Shantirakshita suggested to the king that he should invite his brother or main student Kamalashila to come to Tibet and represent the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism in that debate. So that's just a little background of who Kamalashita is. And he wrote these books, The Path of Meditation. There was more than one volume. And he wrote that in particular to counter the Chinese tradition that that they were competing with. So Kamalashila's first stages of meditation says, after you have thus stabilized your mind on an object of meditation, you should analyze it with wisdom. It is the dawn of knowledge that obliterates the seeds of confusion. If you do not do this, you cannot abandon the afflictions with concentration alone, just as non-Buddhists cannot. The King of Concentration Sutra says, although worldly persons cultivate concentration, they do not destroy the notion of self. Afflictions return and disturb them, as they did Udraka, who cultivated concentration in this way. So if you recall from Shakyamuni Buddha's life story, once he left the palace and started on his journey of renunciation and the path to Buddhahood, he studied with two Indian masters who were masters of different levels of concentration. And Udraka had developed the concentration that was considered the peak of cyclic existence. It was the 4th level of the formless realm. So only the obstacles to liberation that had not been abandoned by the previous levels of the form realm and formless realm concentrations remained to be abandoned at that time. But that highest level of formless concentration was not adequate to abandon those. And so then all of the afflictions would then return because the seeds were never destroyed. The phrase, although worldly persons cultivate concentration, means that worldly persons cultivate a concentration with features such as non-discursiveness and clarity, as explained above. The line, they do not destroy the notion of self, means that despite cultivating that concentration, they cannot eliminate the conception of self. Afflictions return and disturb them. Indicates that worldly persons will still produce afflictions because they have not eliminated the conception of self. What kind of meditation leads to liberation? As said earlier, the very next verse of the King of Concentration Sutra says, if you analytically discern the lack of self in phenomena, and if you cultivate that analysis in meditation, that will cause the result attainment of nirvana. There is no peace through any other means. So that's very clear. The first line sets out the condition. If, after you have analytically discerned phenomena which are selfless, you develop the wisdom that understands the meaning of selflessness, the second line, and if you cultivate this analysis in meditation, refers to sustaining and cultivating in meditation the philosophical view of selflessness that you have gained. The third line, this will cause the result, attainment of nirvana, means that this is the cause of attaining the goal, nirvana, or liberation. Liberation is attained through cultivating that wisdom. Can you also attain liberation without that wisdom by cultivating some other path? The fourth line of this passage says, there is no peace through any other means, meaning that even were you to cultivate another path, you would not quell suffering and the afflictions without that wisdom. This scripture very clearly teaches that only the wisdom of selflessness severs the root of cyclic existence. Kamalashila quotes it in his second stages of meditation in order to discredit the assertions of the Chinese abbot Hashang. Therefore, you must have certain knowledge of this, for even non-Buddhist sages have many good qualities, such as concentration and the super knowledges. So super knowledges means things like knowing what's in the minds of others, remembering former lifetimes, predicting events that are going to happen in the future, being able to see events in the God realms, all kinds of incredible extrasensory perception that are called super knowledges. But since they do not have the view of selflessness, they cannot escape cyclic existence at all. In this way, the scriptural collection of it's on. Thank you. So the scriptural collection of the Bodhisattvas said it earlier says, one who is satisfied with mere concentration, not understanding the reality explained in the scriptures, might develop an inflated sense of pride, mistaking mere concentration for the path of meditation and the profound meaning. Consequently, such a person will not become free from cyclic existence. It was with this in mind that I said, one who listens to others will be free from aging and death. In reading that, Geshe Nawan Darge told us a story one time um, about a famous sadhu meditator who had very long hair. And what he used to do is he had a rope tied up above where he sat in meditation, and he would tie his hair to that rope, and that would help him stay in a posture, because he would go into such deep meditation that he would completely forget about his body. But at the same time, he was a bit proud of his long hair. So one time, while he was meditating, he fell over, and that woke him out of his meditation. And he was a bit shocked by that, and he was dismayed to discover that a rat had eaten his hair, and so it was much shorter now, and he generated anger from that, and because of generating anger, it was very difficult for him to go back into that state of concentration because, in fact, the concentration is able to subdue anger. Doesn't eliminate the seeds of it, but it's able to subdue it. But he was so attached to his hair that anger arose. So anyway, Lama Tsongkhapa is commenting on that quotation. The teacher himself explains clearly what it meant. Listening to others means to hear the explanation of selflessness from another person. Therefore, it is unquestionable that the Buddha spoke of listening to others in order to refute the idea that you can develop the view of selflessness from within yourself without the study and reflection that go along with listening to the excellent external spiritual guide explain the meaning of selflessness. I wrote a big star in the next to that section because it's not uncommon for a Westerner who's becomes introduced to the tradition to especially when they see so much devotion being directed towards a teacher, then they might feel a little bit hesitant to study with the teacher because they might feel that they would have to develop such devotion as well, instead of the fact that devotion just arises naturally because of an appreciation of the qualities of the teacher. But they might think that, well, I'll develop an understanding on my own by like buying a book like this and reading it and thinking about the meaning and so on. The Buddha himself said, one who listens to others will be free from aging and death. And Lama Tsongkhapa emphasizes that point. You're not going to be able to get it by yourself. You're going to have to rely upon the explanations of a qualified spiritual guide, the right teacher. So generally, among all the conqueror's scriptures, there are some that explicitly teach about reality. And even those that do not explicitly teach it, nonetheless indirectly point toward it. The darkness of confusion is not overcome until the knowledge of reality dawns, but it is overcome when that knowledge arises. Therefore, meditative serenity, one-pointedness of mind, does not in itself become pure, sublime wisdom, nor does it overcome the darkness of confusion. Hence, there is no doubt that you must seek wisdom. You should think, I will seek the wisdom that discerns the meaning of selflessness, reality. Kamalashila's second stages of meditation says, then, having achieved serenity, you should cultivate insight. You should, before going on, we're trying to cultivate insight without having developed serenity, right? So are we, abandoning the directions of these great masters? No. No, we can try to develop our understanding of emptiness at any time, right? The cultivation of meditative serenity is the means by which an intellectual understanding will become a direct experience. So we can develop an intellectual understanding at any time, and that intellectual understanding can be very helpful in many ways. Not only does it help one to more easily manage the uncontrolled mind, but also in practices like deity meditation, it provides the space to be able to see oneself as a deity instead of the way we normally identify ourselves. So then, having achieved serenity, we should cultivate insight. You should think, all the sayings of the Bhagavan were spoken well. Directly or indirectly, they all elucidate the point of reality. If I know reality, I will escape all the entanglements of dogmatic views, just as darkness is cleared away by the dawn. Meditative serenity alone does not lead to pure, sublime wisdom, nor will it clear away the darkness of the obscurations. However, if I use wisdom to meditate well on reality, I will reach pure, sublime wisdom and know reality. Only through wisdom can I really get rid of the obscurations. Therefore, I will remain in serenity and use wisdom to pursue reality. I will not be satisfied with meditative serenity alone. What is this reality? Ultimately, all things are empty of the two selves, the self of persons and the self of phenomena. So then Lama Tsongkhapa continues, of all the perfections, it is the perfection of wisdom that knows reality. Since you cannot know it by means of meditative stabilization or the other perfections, you should develop wisdom without mistaking mere meditative stabilization for the perfection of wisdom. The Sutra Unraveling the Intended Meaning says, Bhagavan, through what perfection should the bodhisattvas apprehend the absence of an essence in phenomena? Avalokiteshvara, they should apprehend it through the perfection of wisdom. Lama Tsongkhapa continues, as quoted earlier, the Sutra of Cultivating Faith in the Mahayana also makes the same point. I do not say that those who have faith in the Mahayana of bodhisattvas, unless they have wisdom, are delivered, no matter what Mahayana practice they may do. And in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on the three principles of the path, the second principle is that of bodhicitta. He mentions that no matter how well you develop bodhicitta, without the wisdom realizing emptiness, it won't deliver you from the cycle of uncontrolled death and rebirth, nor will you be able to abandon the obstacles to knowledge. So that was chapter 7. Are there any questions regarding that so far? I think that was pretty clear. And that one was easy. So that was the bridge from the section on meditative serenity to the section of insight. So I'm going to keep going because we still have a half an hour. And, yes?
On. Hello. Thank you. Okay, so to be clear, I just need to be able to make sure that I'm actually hearing this kind of correctly. What Lama Tsongkhapa is outlining, and what he's saying is, I want to avoid giving too much background on this. Through a state of meditation alone, for instance,
Deep concentration,
a place of alleviating mental distress, as it were,
through concentration alone.
through concentration alone, without actually going farther and attaining the actual experience, the actual direct realization of emptiness beyond an intellectual experience. It's farther than that even. It would probably be, I think, perhaps beyond words. I mean, am I on the right track?
I don't
am I
know what
hearing
your
that
question
right?
is.
So I guess the question is, for people who haven't actually even heard of this aspect of things, like all right, so I come from a background of some Japanese Buddhism, and it was my experience there that actually drove me to be here, because there was something about what I was hearing that felt incomplete. And that was, the use of mantras within that particular sect, I think is a good word. And concentration alone were thought to be, the path of the bodhisattva. That was the way they were interpreting things, and that all one needed to do was do that, and they would eventually attain enlightenment. In fact, believe their man. What Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is that is not possible, that it's not possible through mantras alone, or through mantra and concentration, or through that way. If we go into, I mean, we are talking about, if we go into Lam Rim, then you actually have to go through the whole Lam Rim path, and it's only really at the second um, at the middle capable being that you're even introduced to the idea of emptiness. And it's not until you get into Tantra that you're actually able to begin to completely appropriate that and operate in it. And like, does that make any sense at all? Is that what he's saying?
He's saying that you need wisdom,
Yeah.
which is, like for instance, there's a presentation of primary minds and mental factors. And there's like 51 mental factors that the Buddha talked about. He said there's many more, but understand these 51 and you'll understand all the other ones. And they're in different groups. And one of the groups is the 5 object ascertaining mental factors, one of which is concentration, which functions to hold an object single-pointedly without distraction. And the mental factor in general is a function of the mind. Like primary mind is to know the object, and mental factors have specific functions within knowing the object. So one of those is the mental factor of concentration, which holds the object single-pointedly without distraction. Another mental factor is that of wisdom, which can also be translated as intelligence, which has the ability to analyze the object, like whether it exists as it appears. That's one analysis. Another analysis would be, is this a virtuous action or is it a non-virtuous action? It analyzes the object like that. Without employing that mental factor of wisdom, it will not be possible to gain liberation. If one only employs concentration, holding the object single-pointedly, without a doubt, that can help clear the mind of all kinds of distraction and make you, as Geshe-Nao and Darky said, you'll appear like a saint. But without the analysis that examines whether the objects exist as they appear, without that, there's no way to be able to cut through the illusory appearance of things and know their reality. And without knowing their reality, you do not have the antidote to ignorance. And ignorance is the root of cyclic existence. It's the root of all the other afflictions such as attachment, anger, jealousy, and so on. So that's what's being stated. So going on to chapter 8, relying on definitive sources. So we have to cultivate wisdom. How do you do it? You have to rely on definitive sources. That is, explanations that definitively describe ultimate reality, emptiness. So the outline says fulfilling the prerequisites of insight, identifying scriptures of provisional meaning and definitive meaning, the history of commentary on Nagarjuna's intended meaning. So, yeah, so who do you study and what scriptures do you study in order to cultivate the wisdom that realizes emptiness? So, since insight is needed, the second section concerns how to train in insight. The second section goes way back to the beginning of the Lamrim Chenma, where it's divided into main sections, and one of which is the section on insight. So it concerns how to train in insight. It has 4 parts. Fulfilling the prerequisites for insight. That's chapters 8 through 24. Classification of insight, chapter 25. How to cultivate insight in meditation, chapters 25 and 26. The measure of achieving insight through meditation, chapter 26. So that's all that we have to look forward to, if we can stick it out for that many chapters. Right now, we've only planned the 6 sessions. We know it's going to require more, but it's difficult to plan so far ahead. You know, do 6 weeks, take a break, and go on from there. Fulfilling the prerequisites for insight. You should listen to the stainless textual systems, relying on a scholar who accurately understands the key points of the scriptures. An indispensable prerequisite for insight is to use the wisdom gained through study and reflection to develop knowledge of reality. For without a decisive view of how things exist, you cannot develop insight that knows the real nature of emptiness. Also, in seeking such a view, you must rely on that which has, you must not rely on that which has provisional meaning, but rather on that which is definitive. And he'll explain the difference between provisional sutras of provisional meaning and sutras of definitive meaning. Therefore, you should differentiate between the provisional and the definitive, and you should then internalize the meaning of the definitive scriptures. Moreover, if you do not rely on the treatises by authoritative trailblazers commenting on the Buddha's thought, you are like a blind person headed towards danger without a guide. So treatises refer to the great commentaries that were written to elucidate the teachings of the Buddha, and the authoritative trailblazers were people like Nagarjuna, who the Buddha predicted as being somebody who would be able to explain his teachings on ultimate reality. Hence, you must rely on accurate commentaries on the Buddha's thought. On what sort of commentator should you depend? You should rely on the one whom the Bhagavan Buddha himself very clearly prophesied in many sutras and tantras as a commentary on the heart of the teaching, the profound reality beyond all extremes of existence and non-existence. He is the noble Nagarjuna, renowned in this world and in those beyond. Therefore, Rely upon his texts as you seek the view that is the knowledge of emptiness. With regard to these prerequisites for insight, there are three parts: identifying scriptures of provisional and definitive meaning, the history of commentary on Nagarjuna's intended meaning, how to develop the philosophical view of emptiness. That last point is what's dealt with in chapters 9 through 24. So, identifying scriptures of provisional meaning and definitive meaning. Those who wish to know reality must rely on the conqueror's scriptures. And the word conqueror here refers to the Buddha. Conqueror's scriptures. However, due to the diversity of ideas among the Buddha's disciples, the scriptures vary. Hence, you might wonder what sort of scriptures you should rely upon in seeking the meaning of profound reality. You must know reality in reliance upon scriptures of definitive meaning. What sort of scripture is definitive, and what sort is provisional? This is determined by way of the subjects that they discuss. Those that teach the ultimate are considered scriptures of definitive meaning, and those that teach conventionalities are considered scriptures of provisional meaning. In that vein, the teachings of Akshayamati Sutra says, what are sutras of definitive meaning? What are sutras of provisional meaning? Those sutras that teach so as to establish conventionalities are called provisional. Those sutras that teach so as to establish the ultimate are called definitive. Those sutras that teach by way of various words and letters are called provisional. Those sutras that teach the profound reality, which is difficult to understand and difficult to know, are called definitive. Question. How does a sutra teach conventionalities so as to be classified as provisional? And how does a sutra teach the ultimate so as to be classified as definitive? The reply, this also is indicated very clearly in the teachings of Akshayamati Sutra. It says, sutras called provisional are those that teach as though there were an owner where there is none, using various expressions: self, sentient being, living being, nourished being, creature, person, humankind, human, agent, experiencer. Sutras called definitive are those that teach the doors of liberation: emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness, no composition, no production, no creation, no sentient beings, no living beings, no persons, no owners. Kind of sounds like the Heart Sutra, doesn't it? So that definitely is a sutra of definitive meaning. This means that the definitive are those that teach selflessness, no production, and such by eliminating elaborations, while the provisional are those that teach self and so forth. Therefore, you should understand that no self, no production, and such are the ultimate, while production and so forth are the conventional. The King of Concentration Sutras also says, understand as instances of definitive sutras those that teach in accordance with the emptiness explained by the Sugata. Understand as of provisional meaning all those teachings that posit a sentient being, person, or living being. Also, Kamalashila's Illumination of the Middle Way says, therefore, you should understand that only those that discuss the ultimate are of definitive meaning. The others are of provisional meaning. Also, the ornament of the light of wisdom that introduces the object of all Buddhas, that's another text, that says, the definitive object is the ultimate. And also the teachings of Akshayamati Sutra teaches that the absence of production and so forth are definitive. Consequently, it is certain that only the absence of production and so forth are called ultimates. Therefore, Lamatsungkhapa continues, the collections of Madhyamaka arguments, and that's a collection of texts by Nagarjuna and his main disciple, um, Aryadeva, and those are the main texts that are being referred to by this term Madhyamaka arguments, as well as the commentaries on them, are considered texts that precisely teach the definitive because they demonstrate at length the meaning of the ultimate that is free from all masses of elaborations, such as production and cessation. Why are teachings called provisional or definitive? A text is called definitive or of definitive meaning because it cannot be interpreted to mean something else. Its meaning is the end point of the process of making determinations, insofar as it is the meaning of reality itself. No one else can interpret it as having some further or different meaning because it is backed up by valid proofs. Thus, Kamalashila's illumination of the middle way says, what is a text of definitive meaning? It is one that gives an explanation in terms of the ultimate and is supported by valid cognition, for it cannot be interpreted by someone else as having any other contrary meaning. So Lama Tsongkhapa continues, implicitly, this statement allows you to understand the provisional. The provisional, or that which requires interpretation, is a text that cannot be taken to mean exactly what it says. Rather, you must explain what it intends, interpreting it as having some other meaning. Or, if it is a text that can be taken literally, but in which the literal meaning is not the final reality, you must still seek that reality as something other than the conventional phenomena to which the text refers. So, a quam. So here, Lama Tsongkhapa includes what he refers to as qualms or some other scholar's opinion, or he might just invent this opinion to be able to elaborate. So, quam. Since sutras of definitive meaning are literal, when statements such as production does not exist and persons do not exist appear in those sutras, one must conclude that production and persons do not exist at all. Otherwise, those sutras would not be literal and would absurdly follow that they are provisional. The reply. This does not seem tenable because there are many definitive sutras in which the Buddha, the teacher, who makes these statements, adds the qualification ultimately when refuting production and so forth. If he adds such a qualification once, then we must add it even where it does not occur, because it is a common attribute of all such refutations. Since the absence of ultimate existence is the reality of phenomena, how could a sutra teaching this not be definitive? So, just like in the Heart Sutra, at one point it says, these various things do not inherently exist. And the later on talks about this doesn't exist, that doesn't exist, that doesn't exist. It doesn't use the term doesn't inherently exist, doesn't use the qualifier inherently all the time, but one should, the implication is that it should be there because it was said, that's the context, inherently existing. So otherwise, if these sutras did not refute production in a general sense, then as far as particulars, they would also refute words, and hence even the definitive sutras that teach this could not make their presentations. So this is an important point because the definitive sutras are not saying that things don't exist at all, because that would be the extreme of non-existence. They're saying that they don't ultimately exist or they don't inherently exist. There has to be that qualification. Therefore, you should understand that a sutra or a treatise may still be definitive even if what it teaches in a few isolated phrases cannot be read literally when stripped from the context of the general system surrounding it in that scripture. You also should understand that even when the teaching of the very words of a text can be taken literally, the text may still be provisional. So the next section, the history of commentary on Nagarjuna's intended meaning. Nagarjuna gave flawless commentary on scriptures, such as the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, that teach that all phenomena are without any intrinsically existent production, cessation, and so forth. What is the history of commentary on Nagarjuna's thought? Both the father, Nagarjuna, and his spiritual son, Aryadeva, are sources for the other Madhyamikas, even great Madhyamikas such as the masters Buddhapalita, Bhavaviveka, Chandrakirti, Chandarakshita, took Aryadeva to be as authoritative as the master Nagarjuna. Therefore, earlier Tibetan scholars used the term Madhyamikas of the fundamental text for those two, that is, Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, and the term partisan Madhyamikas for the others, such as Buddhapalita, Bhavaviveka, Chandrakirti, and so on. In the past, there were some Tibetan teachers who said that when Madhyamikas are described in terms of how they posit conventionalities, there are two types. Well, I just want to mention this term Madhyamika, there's an I, Mika, that refers to the person who follows the Madhyamaka philosophy. Madhyamaka has an A instead of an I. So Madhyamaka is the Sanskrit for the middle way. A Madhyamika is a person who follows the middle way, or a Madhyamaka. So there were previous Tibetan teachers who posited teachers who said that when Madhyamikas are described in terms of how they posit conventionalities, there are two types. Sautrantika Madhyamikas, who assert that external objects exist conventionally, and Yogacara Madhyamikas, who assert that external objects do not exist conventionally. Madhyamikas are also of two types when described in terms of how they assert the ultimate. The proponents of rationally established illusion assert that a composite of appearance and emptiness is an ultimate truth, and the proponents of thorough non-abiding assert that the mere elimination of elaborations with regard to appearances is an ultimate truth. These earlier teachers assert that within the second typology, the first type includes masters such as Shantirakshita and Kamalashila. There were also some Indian masters who used the terms illusion-like and thoroughly non-abiding to refer to different types of Madhyamikas. So this is Lama Tsongkhapa is talking about how there are these different teachers of the middle way, Madhyamaka, and they had their different opinions about how to divide it into different categories. And so Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't agree with all of these. And so he's presenting his own opinion, and he has to present it with some reasons. And this is something that could be debated by other scholars. So if we don't get all of this, don't worry. Broadly speaking, there were some Indian and Tibetan masters who claimed to be Madhyamikas who used this kind of terminology in dividing Madhyamikas. However, here I am to establish only the systems of the great Madhyamikas who are followers of the master Nagarjuna. Who could explain every subtle distinction? Moreover, the great translator Loden Sherab makes an excellent point when he says that this presentation of two types of Madhyamikas distinguished according to how they assert the ultimate, is simply something to impress fools. For those who make such a distinction seem to be claiming that for proponents of rationally established illusion, such as Shantarakshita and Kamalashila, the mere object that is understood by an inferential reasoning consciousness is an ultimate truth. Whereas both Shantirakshita's text, Ornament for the Middle Way, and Kamalashila's text, Illumination of the Middle Way, say that the object understood by a reasoning consciousness is designated ultimate due to being concordant with the ultimate truth. So these previous scholars seem to have missed this point when they included Kamalashila and Shantarakshita as proponents of this division that they came up with. Also, the other great Madhyamikas do not accept that an ultimate truth, the mere object that is arrived at when reason eliminates elaborations with regard to an appearance. Let me read that again. Also, the other Madhyamikas do not accept as an ultimate truth the mere object that is arrived at when reason eliminates elaborations with regard to an appearance. Therefore, this division is not a good approach. It's, because there are many different elaborations that could arise with an appearance. And one of the main points of Lama Tsongkhapa in his section in this presentation of insight is to identify the actual illusion that has to be eliminated in order to understand reality. And so saying just eliminating elaborations with regard to an appearance is not sufficient. That's not precise enough. As to the history of commentary on Nagarjuna's thought, the master Yeshe De, so this was a great early scholar, a Tibetan scholar, explains that the masters, the noble Nagarjuna and his spiritual son Aryadeva, did not make clear in their Madhyamaka treatises whether external objects exist. Later, the master Bhavaviveka refuted the system of Vijnaptimatra. Vijnaptimatra means mind only. And the mind only school says there's no external objects, everything is just mind. So Bhavaviveka refuted that and presented a system in which external objects exist conventionally. Then the master Shantirakshita set forth a different Madhyamaka system that teaches based on Yogačara's text. Yogačara, or the practice of yoga, is just another name for the mind-only school. So based on Yogačara text, that external objects do not exist conventionally. It also teaches that the mind ultimately lacks intrinsic existence. And that is different from the mind-only school. The mind-only school says that external objects don't exist at all, but the mind has intrinsic existence. So the Madhyamakas say nothing has intrinsic existence. Thus, two forms of Madhyamaka arose. The former is called Sautrantika Madhyamaka, and the later Yogačara Madhyamaka. So those divisions Lama Tsongkhapa accepts. One is a Madhyamaka system that accepts external objects, and the other is a Madhyamaka system that does not accept external objects, like the mind-only school, but refutes the inherent existence of the mind, unlike the mind-only school. It is evident that this sequence of events, as explained by Yeshe De, is correct. However, while the master Chandrakirti does not assert that external objects, the master Chandrakirti does assert that external objects exist conventionally. He does not do so in a manner congruent with the claims of other tenant systems. So, and the position that somebody, that a scholar and author of a text takes is determined by what they're mainly talking about. And one way that they present their position is by debating within their text other positions that they disagree with. And so if like Bhava Viveka is a scholar who disagreed with the position that there's no external objects, and in his text, he asserted that there were external objects, at least on the conventional level, not the ultimate level, but at least on the conventional level. And he did that by refuting, or using reasoning to refute the other position. And therefore, he's called a Sautrantika Madhyamika, whereas Chandrakirti didn't do that in his texts, so he's not called a Sautrantika Madhyamika, even though he does assert the existence of external objects conventionally. He does not do so in a manner congruent with the claims of other tenant systems. Thus, it is unsuitable to call him a Sautrantika Madhyamika. Similarly, the claim that he is in accord with the Vaibhashikas is also very unreasonable. So the Vaibhashika was another school of Buddhism, a philosophical school of Buddhism, and it accepted inherent existence, but they also talked about imputed existence was a conventional truth, and substantial existence was the ultimate truth. So the fact that they use the term imputed existence, somebody might think, oh, that's just like Chandrakirti. It's not like Chandrakirti at all, because that school asserted that things truly existed in their own right, inherently existed. So that would be a big mistake to confuse Chandrakirti's system with the Vaibhashikas. So there's just a little bit more to go. I want to finish it. Scholars of the later dissemination of Buddhist teachings to the snowy land of Tibet. There were two disseminations of Buddhism into Tibet. The first was in the 8th century, and that's where the Nyingma school was born, and they made translations according to the translators they had at that time. And then later on, like during the several hundred years later, like during the time of Marpa and so on, then you had the later dissemination using different terminology to translate the Sanskrit. So scholars of the later dissemination of Buddhist teachings to the snowy land of Tibet use the terms Prasangika and Svatantrika for different types of Madhyamikas. Since this agrees with Chandrakirti's clear words, Prasanapada, you should not suppose that it is their own fabrication. So Lama Tsongkhapa likes this presentation of Madhyamikas into the two types, Prasangika and Svatantrika. And this will come up later. And he said that, the scholars of the new dissemination, these Tibetan scholars, it's not something that they just came up with themselves. It's also based upon teachings that were given by great Indian masters like Chandrakirti. Therefore, all Madhyamikas are included within two types, those who do and those who do not assert external objects in conventional terms. If they are distinguished in terms of how they develop within their mind streams the view that is certain knowledge of emptiness, the ultimate, then again, they are included within two types, Prasangikas and Svatantrikas. Prasangika is a Sanskrit word that means consequence. So developing an understanding of emptiness by using a form of reasoning known as consequences. Like, it's like this, otherwise this absurd consequence applies. So you should accept it. So that's like using a consequence to prove something. Whereas this Svatantrika is using means independent reasons. So it's using a reason like the person is empty of inherent existence because of being a dependent arising. So it's using an inference to gain an understanding. Only and the differentiation between Prasangikas and Svatantrikas occurs in the later chapters of this book. Following whom did those masters seek to understand what the noble Nagarjuna and his spiritual son Aryadeva intended? The great elder Atisha, who was an Indian master who went to Tibet in the 11th century, considered the system of the master Chandrakirti to be the main Madhyamaka system. Seeing this, the great gurus of the past who followed Atisha in giving personal instructions on these stages of the path also took Chandrakirti's system as the main system. The master Chandrakirti saw that among the commentators on Nagarjuna's fundamental treatise on the middle way, and Nagarjuna's treatise, fundamental treatise on the middle way, is his main. I mean, he has like several, like 6 or 7 great texts, but this one, Fundamental Treatise on the Middle Way, which is that's an abbreviated title. Uh, uh, what is it? Prajnamula is added. No, Prajnanama is added onto it. So, Fundamental Treatise on the Middle Way, called Wisdom. That's the full title. And this will be abbreviated like Fundamental Treatise to be referred to. So Nagarjuna's, it was the master Buddhapalita who had fully elucidated what the noble Nagarjuna intended. So he commented on the noble Nagarjuna's intended meaning using his system as the basis. He also took many good explanations from the master Bhavaviveka, while refuting those that seemed a little inaccurate, inasmuch as the commentaries of Master Buddhapalita and the glorious Chandrakirti are seen to be excellent explanations of the text of the noble Nagarjuna and his spiritual son, Aryadeva. I will follow them in making determinations about what the noble Nagarjuna intended. So your homework is to read chapter 9. Hopefully you have a text. Chapter 9 is not very long. So if you finish it before next week, don't hesitate to go on to chapter 11. And if you have questions, send me an email. Let me know what your questions are so that I might be able to prepare something and at least be able to identify whether we have a satisfactory answer to those questions or if we should, preserve those questions for when Sergam Rinpoche returns. Okay, so whatever effort you made to follow what has been said tonight, to fulfill the purpose of being here, developing our understanding of emptiness, dedicate that. Dedicate it to achieve the supreme view of ultimate reality in order to eliminate the obstacles to liberation and the obstacles to knowledge, and thus become a perfect cause for the welfare of all living beings. Thank you.